Boris Johnson said he'd rather die in a ditch than ask for a Brexit extension. It turns out he wouldn't. The EU is pondering how to reply to the letters. Good evening. It might take the EU days to get back to Boris Johnson as they watch what happens in Parliament as the government tries to bring the deal back tomorrow. Opposition MPs are planning to add a referendum or amend it to leave the UK in the EU customs union. The PM claims he will get the deal passed by October 31st and doesn't want an extension. And perhaps to up the pressure on MPs, Michael Gove dramatically announced he was triggering Operation Yellowhammer because the risk of no deal had increased. Also tonight, police investigate after players abandoned an FA Cup qualifying match, alleging there'd been racist abuse of players by people in the crowd. The Alabama Shakes frontwoman Brittany Howard on a solo album, growing up in the American South and surviving the retinal cancer that took her sister. And Wales scraped their way into the Rugby World Cup semi-finals. So Boris Johnson is insisting the UK will leave the European Union in 11 days' time, despite sending an unsigned letter to the EU asking for an extension. Another showdown in the House of Commons now looms as early as tomorrow, when the Speaker will decide if Mr Johnson can hold a meaningful vote on his Brexit deal, with ministers claiming they have enough support to get it through. Here's our political correspondent, Liz Bays.
This is Boris Johnson last month when he was asked if he would ever request a Brexit extension beyond October 31st.
I'd rather be dead in a ditch.
Fast forward a few weeks.
Order!
And after being forced by MPs through legislation designed to avoid a no-deal Brexit, the Prime Minister eventually did as he was told, but in his own style. Here is the extension request, sent last night, a photocopy left unsigned, and crucially followed by another letter saying the exact opposite, that a further extension would damage the interests of the UK and our EU partners and the relationship between us. A clever move or a misstep that could end in another court battle?
I suspect this is going to be a matter for the courts. We are in a constitutional crisis, and quite frankly, any Prime Minister should be above this.
But even with legal threats looming, the government's focus is on getting Mr Johnson's Brexit deal passed in a Commons vote this week. And this morning, ministers were confident.
We seem to have the numbers in the House of Commons. Why hasn't Parliament pushed this through? That's what we're going to do next week.
Ministers think this is their moment, but any amendments to their Brexit legislation could open the door to another Commons vote on a second referendum, something People's Vote campaigners have been waiting for. If MPs do get the chance to vote for a second referendum this week, Labour say they will back it. But are they united? I was at the People's Vote rally yesterday, and a lot of the shadow cabinet were there as well. A lot of people were chanting, "Where's Jeremy Corbyn?" Where was Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think Jeremy was at a rally up in Liverpool, but I'll tell you about yesterday. Yesterday we worked together as a team and we voted together as a team, and I'm really proud of the fact we were so united.
And as Brexit creates unlikely political alliances, an unexpected offer of cooperation from Labour to the DUP, who have said this week that they too cannot support the Prime Minister's deal.
It's very important to send a message to all MPs, all political parties, but particularly the DUP, that if they want to improve on the situation we're in, then our door is open.
Amid the last-minute political manoeuvring, the Cabinet Minister shaping Brexit, Michael Gove, made his own not-so-subtle attempt to win over wavering MPs by reminding them that no deal is still very much a possibility.
The risk of leaving without a deal has actually increased because we cannot guarantee that the European Council will grant an extension, and that is why I will later today be chairing a Cabinet Committee meeting, extraordinarily on a Sunday, in order to ensure that the next stage of our exit preparations and our preparedness for no deal is accelerated.
All eyes now on Brussels and their response to the Prime Minister's reluctant extension request.
But it's not business as usual, is it?
No word yet, but with time running out, they'll have to come up with an answer soon.
Anne Liz is with me now. So what's the government's plan this week?
So what we're expecting from the government this week is that they're going to have another go at holding this vote on Boris Johnson's Brexit plan that they couldn't manage to hold over the weekend because it was blocked by MPs. They really think that they've got the numbers to pass it, and so they want to try again. But the person that could get in their way this time round is the Commons Speaker, John Bercow. He might decide that MPs have already been asked this question once and that they shouldn't be asked the same question twice. And what we do know is that John Bercow has been a thorn in the government's side many times before, especially on Brexit issues. But for a decision on this, we're going to have to wait until tomorrow at the earliest.
So the government's going to try and push through the legislation. What's the opposition going to do?
So we've heard from the opposition today, when this Brexit deal finally does get to the Commons, their plan, they're against it, so they want to frustrate it or reshape it in some way. So there will be, from them, an amendment which would see Britain stay within a customs union. That's a significantly softer Brexit than the government is pursuing. The other thing is, if an amendment goes down under second referendum, the Labour Party will support that. But what we do know about the Labour Party is that many of their MPs, particularly in Leave areas, are completely at odds with the leadership over these issues. So déjà vu, once again, we're going to see Labour splits on Brexit.
Thanks, Liz. Well, tens of thousands of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong were violently dispersed by police after they took to the streets in defiance of a ban on assembly. What began as a peaceful march descended into chaos as protesters threw firebombs and took their anger out on shops linked to mainland China. Police fired back with tear gas and water cannon. Many protesters wore masks, despite a ban on face coverings at public gatherings. The protests began 5 months ago in opposition to an extradition bill, but rapidly expanded into demands for full democracy.
The reason why number of protesters dropped was because the government are now refusing to or refuse to authorize any peaceful protest. That means anyone who come out will inherently break the law. So that's the tactic that the Hong Kong government is using. So don't think that the movement is slowing down. In fact, it is growing stronger and stronger.
And there have been massive street protests in other parts of the world too today. In Lebanon, tens of thousands of protesters turned out in cities across the country, the biggest crowds in 4 days of anti-government demonstrations. The protests were triggered by government plans to impose new taxes as part of sweeping austerity measures, leaving the National Unity Cabinet, headed by Prime Minister Saad Hariri, in crisis. Ministers are now trying to agree an economic rescue plan they hope will reassure the public.
We're continuing with the movement. Even if we have to escalate, we will remain part of the movement until our last breath. This has become like our job, because there are no jobs in the country. Our job has become to come and demand our rights.
And in the Chilean capital, Santiago, where there's been 2 successive nights of rioting, 3 people died when demonstrators set fire to a supermarket. The unrest continued despite President Piñera's decision to suspend the metro fare increase, which first brought people out onto the streets. Tanks and troops have been deployed across the city, along with a nighttime curfew, as the government declared a state of emergency.
There was a fire in a supermarket, and when policemen and firefighters entered, they found 2 burnt bodies and another person in very bad shape. They were taken to a hospital and sadly also died.
And in Barcelona, demonstrators are back on the streets tonight. These are the scenes from the city live right now. Violent protests by Catalan independence supporters rocked Spain's second largest city on Saturday. The trouble began after 9 pro-independence leaders were imprisoned over their role in 2017's failed attempt to win succession. Police in Milton Keynes have launched a double murder investigation after 2 17-year-old boys were stabbed to death in what officers described as a shocking incident during a house party. One of the teenagers died at the property in a quiet housing estate in the city shortly before midnight, while the other boy died later in hospital. Another 17-year-old and a man aged 23 were seriously hurt.
Clearly, this is a dreadful incident, and we are in the very early stages of the investigation. We have deployed significant resources, and it is, and will continue to be, a fast-moving investigation led by our major crime unit.
Donald Trump has abruptly scrapped his plan to hold next year's G7